Paris, October 1795. The streets are tense. Royalist protesters march on the National Convention, threatening to overthrow the revolutionary government. Chaos looms. A young artillery officer, Napoleon Bonaparte, is given temporary command of the defense. Without hesitation, he moves cannons into position, right through the crowds, with the help of Joachim Murat, a young cavalry officer. When the crowd refuses to disperse, he gives the order to fire. In a single day, the rebellion is crushed. Napoleon becomes a household name. The Directory, the government of post-revolutionary France, suddenly sees him not just as a loyal officer, but as a weapon of survival. Within months, he's promoted and chosen to lead one of France's most important campaigns, a military offensive against Austria in northern Italy. It's March 1796. He is just 26 years old. The army of Italy he inherits is underfed, unpaid, and on the verge of collapse. But Napoleon acts quickly. He boosts morale, reorganizes his officers, and begins an aggressive and fast-moving campaign. At Lodi, he defeats Austrian forces and earns the respect of his soldiers, many of whom begin calling him the Little Corporal, a nickname that reflects his closeness with the men in the ranks. He shares their food, marches beside them, and knows many of them by name. Over the following months, he drives Austrian forces out of Lombardy and forces the Papal States into submission. When Pope Pius VI protests the execution of Louis XVI, France retaliates by annexing papal territories. Though Napoleon is ordered to march on Rome, he refuses, showing, for the first time, his willingness to disobey civilian leadership when he disagrees. A year later, Rome is invaded by another French general, and the Pope dies in captivity. Meanwhile, Napoleon continues his advance into Austria. His victories pile up. By 1797, Austria sues for peace. The Treaty of Campo Formio gives France control over Belgium, northern Italy, the Rhineland, and parts of the Netherlands. A secret clause hands the remains of the Venetian Republic, once a 1,000-year-old independent power, over to Austria. In exchange, Venice is effectively erased from the map. Across Italy, Napoleon establishes new sister republics modeled after France, including the Cisalpine Republic. These are not independent states, but satellites of Paris, bound to French interests. At the same time, Napoleon is becoming more than a general, he is becoming a political force. He begins publishing newspapers for his army, full of patriotic propaganda, and distributes them in France as well. He carefully cultivates his public image. In May 1797, he launches a third paper, this time in Paris. Royalists are gaining strength in national elections, and Napoleon is becoming a symbol of revolutionary strength. When the Royalist bloc threatens the Directory, Napoleon intervenes from afar. He sends General Pierre Augereau to carry out a bloodless coup on September 4. The Royalists are removed from government. The Directory survives, but now, its stability depends on Napoleon. At this point, he is the most powerful man in France, without holding any political office. His military success, his popularity with the public, and his control of the narrative make him untouchable. But Napoleon is ambitious. In 1798, he proposes a bold new plan, a military expedition to Egypt. Officially, it's to protect French trade and challenge British access to India. In reality, it's a way to expand French influence in the East, and perhaps eventually march toward India itself. The Directory, nervous about his popularity, agrees. Sending him far from Paris seems like a good idea. In May 1798, Napoleon departs France with a fleet and over 30,000 men, along with more than 160 scientists, engineers, artists, and historians. It's a campaign unlike anything seen before. On June 9, he captures Malta from the Knights of St. John. Then, after narrowly avoiding the British Navy, he lands in Alexandria on July 1. Soon after, Napoleon marches inland to face the Mamluks, the dominant military force in Egypt. At the Battle of the Pyramids, he confronts a massive army, nearly 100,000 Mamluks against 25,000 French troops. But Napoleon uses new tactics. His troops form hollow squares with artillery and supply wagons in the center, protecting against cavalry charges. The Mamluks are crushed. In a few hours, Napoleon controls Cairo. But the campaign quickly takes a dark turn. On August 1, British Admiral Horatio Nelson finds the French fleet anchored at Aboukir Bay, and destroys it. Of the entire French fleet, only 2 ships escape. Napoleon's army is now trapped in Egypt, cut off from reinforcements and supplies. Still, he tries to consolidate power. He positions himself as a liberator of the Egyptian people, portraying the French as allies against the Ottoman Empire. But the population remains skeptical. Revolts break out, and resistance grows. In early 1799, Napoleon begins a new campaign into Ottoman Syria, present-day Israel, Gaza, and Lebanon. He leads 13,000 men north, capturing towns like Al-Arish, Gaza, Jaffa, and Haifa. But the campaign becomes notorious for its brutality. At Jaffa, Napoleon's army kills 1,400 Ottoman soldiers who tried to surrender. Over the next 3 days, French troops loot the city and kill civilians. Napoleon later orders the execution of 3,000 Turkish prisoners. His army is suffering. Disease spreads, especially plague. Supplies are scarce. And when they reach Acre, they face strong resistance. The French cannot take the city. Weakened and demoralized, the army retreats back to Egypt. Napoleon orders the abandonment, and in some cases, execution, of wounded soldiers and plague victims, fearing they will slow down the withdrawal. Back in Egypt, he wins one last major engagement, the Second Battle of Aboukir, on July 25, defeating a Turkish force trying to land on the coast. But by now, it's clear, the Egyptian expedition has failed strategically. His army is stranded, supplies are running low, and France is at war again in Europe. In August 1799, Napoleon secretly leaves Egypt, boarding a ship and sailing back to France without informing the Directory. He leaves his army behind under the command of General Jean-Baptiste Kleber. Though the campaign in Egypt ends in military failure, Napoleon returns home to a hero's welcome. The French public is unaware of the full extent of the disaster. His control of the press, his reputation, and his timing ensure that only his victories are remembered. The Directory is weak. France is unstable. People are desperate for a strong leader. From Corsican outsider to the master of Europe's largest republic, Napoleon's rise was fast, ruthless, and calculated. His military victories and political instincts turned him into a symbol of revolutionary France, and a threat to the old monarchies of Europe. In 1804, he would crown himself emperor. But that's a story for the next chapter.